The Black Dahlia, Hollywood's most notorious unsolved murder, January 15, 1947, Los Angeles, California. The post-war boom was in full swing, and Hollywood was the glittering epicenter of American dreams. But on this cold Wednesday morning, those dreams would collide with a nightmare that would haunt the city for decades to come. A mother and her young daughter were walking through a vacant lot in the Leimert Park neighborhood when they made a discovery that would shock the nation. What they initially thought was a discarded mannequin was, in fact, the mutilated remains of a young woman. Her body had been cut in half at the waist, drained of blood, and posed with surgical precision. This was no ordinary murder. The victim's face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating a grotesque Glasgow smile. The killer had taken their time, displaying a level of methodical brutality that suggested intimate knowledge of human anatomy. The victim was Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress with jet black hair and dreams of stardom. But in death, she would become known by a name that would echo through true crime history: the Black Dahlia. To understand this case, we must first understand Elizabeth Short herself, a young woman whose life was as complex and troubled as the mystery surrounding her death. Born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, Elizabeth came from a fractured family. Her father, Cleo Short, abandoned the family when Elizabeth was just 6 years old, leaving her mother Phoebe to raise 5 daughters during the Great Depression. The trauma of abandonment would follow Elizabeth throughout her short life. As a teenager, Elizabeth was already showing signs of restlessness. She was arrested for underage drinking in 1943 and sent back to Massachusetts from Florida, where she'd been living with a man much older than herself. This pattern, seeking older male companionship and moving frequently, would define her adult years. Elizabeth dreamed of Hollywood stardom. Like thousands of other young women in the 1940s, she believed her beauty and ambition would be enough to break into the movie business. In 1946, at age 21, she made her way to Los Angeles, carrying little more than hope and determination. But Hollywood in the 1940s was a brutal place for aspiring actresses. Elizabeth struggled to find steady work, taking odd jobs and relying on the kindness and sometimes the desires of various men she met. She lived a nomadic existence, staying with friends, acquaintances, and occasionally strangers. Those who knew Elizabeth described her as striking, about 5'5", with pale skin, dark hair, and blue eyes. She had a penchant for black clothing, which later contributed to her posthumous nickname. But beneath her glamorous exterior was a young woman grappling with loneliness, financial instability, and the harsh realities of Depression-era America. Elizabeth's personal life was complicated. She had relationships with several men, including soldiers she'd met during the war years. She was engaged at least once to a soldier named Gordon Fickling, though the relationship ended. Her romantic entanglements would later become crucial elements in the investigation, as police tried to piece together her final days. In the months leading up to her death, Elizabeth's life became increasingly chaotic. She bounced between various living situations in Los Angeles, staying with different friends and acquaintances. She was last seen alive on January 9, 1947, 6 days before her body was discovered. What happened during those missing 6 days remains one of the most perplexing aspects of this case. Elizabeth seemed to have vanished into thin air, only to reappear in the most horrific circumstances imaginable. Betty Bersinger was taking a routine morning walk with her 3-year-old daughter Anne when her life intersected with one of America's most infamous murder cases. As they strolled through the vacant lot on South Norton Avenue in Leimert Park, something caught Betty's eye. From a distance, it looked like a broken department store mannequin, pale, motionless, positioned at an odd angle in the weedy lot. But as Betty drew closer, the horrible truth became apparent. This was no mannequin. This was the severed torso of a young woman positioned with deliberate care about 10 feet from the sidewalk. Betty immediately grabbed her daughter and ran to a nearby house to call the police. Within minutes, the vacant lot was swarming with LAPD officers, detectives, and crime scene photographers. What they found defied comprehension. The victim had been cut in half at the waist with surgical precision. Both halves of the body had been completely drained of blood and thoroughly washed. The killer had posed the remains in a specific position, arms raised above the head, legs spread apart. The mutilation was extensive and methodical. The victim's face bore deep cuts from the corners of her mouth to her ears. Flesh had been carved from her thighs. Most disturbing of all, the precision of the cuts suggested someone with medical knowledge, or at least significant anatomical expertise. Detective Harry Hansen, one of the first investigators on the scene, would later describe it as the most horrific crime scene he'd encountered in his 20-year career. The level of violence, combined with the careful positioning of the body, suggested this was no crime of passion. This was something else entirely, something calculated and deeply disturbing. The crime scene yielded few immediate clues. There was no blood. The body had been killed and mutilated elsewhere, then transported to the lot during the night. No murder weapon was found. No personal effects were discovered nearby. But the killer had made one crucial mistake. The victim's fingerprints were intact, and within hours, the LAPD had identified the body as belonging to Elizabeth Short, the 22-year-old aspiring actress who'd been reported missing by concerned friends. News of the discovery spread quickly through Los Angeles, and by evening, reporters had descended on the story with unprecedented fervor. The combination of Hollywood glamour, brutal violence, and mystery proved irresistible to the press. It was during this media frenzy that Elizabeth Short acquired her infamous nickname. Contrary to popular belief, she wasn't known as the Black Dahlia during her lifetime. The moniker was created by a reporter at the Los Angeles Examiner, possibly inspired by the 1946 film The Blue Dahlia, starring Alan Ladd. The name stuck, and Elizabeth Short, the person, began to fade behind the legend of the Black Dahlia. The Black Dahlia investigation became one of the largest in LAPD history. Over 750 investigators were assigned to the case. They conducted more than 150 interviews and followed up on over 5,000 tips from the public. Leading the investigation were detectives Harry Hansen and Finis Brown, experienced investigators who found themselves dealing with a case unlike any in their careers. The brutality of the crime, combined with intense media pressure, created an atmosphere of urgency and desperation. The first breakthrough came from an unlikely source. 3 days after the body's discovery, someone claiming to be the killer contacted the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper. The caller, speaking in a calm, measured voice, said he would send Elizabeth's belongings to prove his identity. True to his word, a package arrived at the newspaper containing Elizabeth's Social Security card, birth certificate, address book, and other personal items. The items had been soaked in gasoline, presumably to destroy fingerprints, and the address book had several pages torn out. This contact suggested the killer was following media coverage closely and seemed to relish the attention. But it also provided investigators with crucial evidence about Elizabeth's final days. The investigation revealed that Elizabeth had spent her last known days at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She'd been seen in the hotel lobby on January 9th, apparently waiting to meet someone. Security footage and witness testimonies placed her there around 6:30 p.m., but after that, she seemed to vanish. Detectives began constructing a timeline of Elizabeth's final weeks. She had stayed with various acquaintances throughout December 1946 and early January 1947. Her last confirmed residence was with a woman named Dorothy French in Pacific Beach, near San Diego. The investigation uncovered Elizabeth's complex romantic life. She had been involved with multiple men, including several soldiers and at least one married businessman. Each relationship became a potential lead, requiring extensive investigation. One particularly promising lead involved a man named Robert "Red" Manley, a married salesman who had given Elizabeth a ride from San Diego to Los Angeles on January 8th, just one day before she disappeared. Manley submitted to multiple polygraph tests and extensive questioning, but was ultimately cleared as a suspect. The physical evidence was frustratingly sparse. The killer had been extraordinarily careful, leaving virtually no forensic traces. The precision of the mutilation suggested medical knowledge, leading investigators to question doctors, medical students, and morticians throughout the Los Angeles area. As weeks turned to months, the investigation began to reveal the darker side of 1940s Los Angeles. Elizabeth's address book led detectives into a world of nightclubs, Hollywood parties, and underground social circles where morality was fluid and secrets were currency. The case attracted attention from fortune tellers, psychics, and amateur detectives, all claiming to have insights into the killer's identity. The LAPD received hundreds of false confessions, each requiring investigation and resources. Perhaps most frustrating were the legitimate leads that seemed to evaporate upon closer examination. Witnesses would change their stories. Evidence would prove inconclusive. Suspects would have alibis that couldn't be broken. The investigation also revealed the extent to which Elizabeth's story had been sensationalized by the media. Reports of her being a prostitute or involved in pornography were largely unsubstantiated, created by reporters seeking to add scandal to an already shocking story. As 1947 progressed, public interest in the case began to wane, but the LAPD continued working leads. The case file grew to massive proportions, thousands of pages of interviews, evidence reports, and investigative notes. But despite the extensive investigation, despite the resources devoted to the case, despite the public attention and media pressure, the Black Dahlia murder remained stubbornly unsolved. Over the decades, the Black Dahlia case has generated numerous theories and potential suspects. Some have been credible, others fantastical, but none have provided the definitive answer that would bring closure to this enduring mystery. One of the most persistent theories involves Dr. George Hodel, a prominent Los Angeles physician. In 2003, former LAPD detective Steve Hodel, Dr. Hodel's own son, published a book claiming his father was the Black Dahlia killer. Steve Hodel presented circumstantial evidence, including his father's medical knowledge, connections to the area where the body was found, and alleged psychological profile matching. The theory gained traction because Dr. Hodel had the medical expertise to perform such precise mutilation, and he was known to have lived a bohemian lifestyle that brought him into contact with Hollywood's underground scene. However, despite compelling circumstantial evidence, no definitive proof has ever been established. Another significant suspect was Leslie Dillon, a bellhop from Miami, who became a person of interest when he sent a letter to police psychiatrist Dr. Joseph Paul DeRiver, discussing the case in unusual detail. Dillon was brought to Los Angeles for questioning in 1949, but the investigation was botched when DeRiver conducted unauthorized interviews. Dillon was eventually released and later sued the LAPD for false imprisonment. Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner who had allowed Elizabeth to stay at his home in the weeks before her death, was also investigated extensively. Hansen knew many aspiring actresses and had connections throughout Hollywood's entertainment industry. However, no concrete evidence ever linked him to the murder. Some theories have focused on the possibility that Elizabeth was killed by someone in the medical profession. The precision of the cuts, the complete drainage of blood, and the surgical-like bisection of the body all suggested someone with anatomical knowledge. This led investigators to question hundreds of doctors, medical students, and morticians, but again, no definitive suspect emerged. Perhaps the most disturbing theory is that Elizabeth was killed by someone she knew and trusted. The lack of defensive wounds suggested she may not have initially felt threatened by her attacker. This has led some investigators to believe the killer was someone who had gained her confidence, possibly someone she was romantically involved with. The organized nature of the crime scene has also led to speculation about multiple perpetrators. The transportation of the body, the careful positioning, the thorough cleanup. Some experts believe this level of organization might have required more than one person. Over the years, numerous individuals have confessed to the murder, but most have been dismissed as attention seekers or mentally disturbed individuals. The high-profile nature of the case has attracted false confessions from people seeking notoriety or struggling with mental illness. Modern forensic techniques have been applied to remaining evidence, including DNA analysis, but the degradation of materials over time and the contamination of the original crime scene have limited the effectiveness of these approaches. What makes the Black Dahlia case so enduringly mysterious is not just the brutality of the crime, but the complete absence of the killer from the historical record. Unlike many unsolved cases where suspects remain under suspicion, the Black Dahlia investigation has never produced a definitive prime suspect that investigators could focus on with confidence. The killer, it seems, managed to commit one of the most notorious murders in American history, and then simply disappear, leaving behind only questions and theories that have persisted for over 7 decades. Narrator. The Black Dahlia case has transcended its origins as a criminal investigation to become a permanent fixture in American popular culture. Elizabeth Short's story has inspired dozens of books, films, television shows, and documentaries, each attempting to solve the mystery or explore its cultural significance. But this cultural fascination has come at a cost. Elizabeth Short, the real person, has been largely forgotten in favor of the Black Dahlia legend. The young woman who dreamed of Hollywood stardom has become a symbol of the dark side of those dreams, her identity subsumed by the brutal circumstances of her death. The case also marked a turning point in crime reporting and public fascination with murder mysteries. The sensational coverage of the Black Dahlia investigation established many of the patterns we see in modern true crime media. The focus on attractive victims, the speculation about the killer's psychology, and the transformation of tragedy into entertainment. For the LAPD, the Black Dahlia represents both their most famous failure and a testament to the limitations of 1940s investigative techniques. The case remains officially open, though active investigation ceased decades ago. Occasionally, new tips or theories emerge, but none have provided the breakthrough that would finally solve the mystery. What can we learn from the Black Dahlia case? Perhaps it serves as a reminder of how violence against women has been sensationalized and commodified throughout history. Elizabeth Short's story reveals the dangerous vulnerability of young women seeking independence in an era that offered them few protections or opportunities. The case also demonstrates how some mysteries resist solution despite extensive investigation and public attention. Not every crime can be solved, not every question can be answered, and sometimes the most haunting cases are those that leave us with more questions than answers. Today, more than 75 years after Elizabeth Short's murder, the vacant lot where her body was found has been developed into residential housing. Norton Avenue is now just another street in Los Angeles, with no marker to indicate the site of one of America's most famous crime scenes. But the mystery endures. The Black Dahlia case continues to fascinate new generations of true crime enthusiasts, amateur investigators, and professional detectives who believe they might be the one to finally crack the case. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old when she died. She had dreams of stardom, hopes for the future, and a life that was brutally cut short by someone who has never been held accountable for their actions. In remembering the Black Dahlia, we should also remember Elizabeth Short, not just as a victim or a mystery, but as a young woman whose story reminds us that behind every infamous crime is a human life that mattered. The Black Dahlia case remains unsolved. The killer was never caught. Justice was never served. But Elizabeth Short's story continues to be told, ensuring that her memory and the search for answers will persist for generations to come.